12 people were strapped into a 19-seat turboprop, sitting still in the middle of an active runway at Los Angeles International Airport, doing exactly what the tower had told them to do. That obedience killed all of them. Because somewhere behind them, out over the water, a Boeing 737 had just been cleared to land on the exact piece of pavement they were parked on. And nobody, not one person, not one machine, not one system in the entire United States air traffic network that night was going to catch it. Friday, February 1st, 1991. Los Angeles after dark. You've seen this if you've ever flown into LAX at night. It's gorgeous. Blue taxiway lamps, white runway edge lights, the whole city stacked up behind it climbing into the hills. Investigators would later describe that same view a little differently. They'd call it a place where a small airplane can simply vanish. Hold that thought. You're going to need it. Around 6 o'clock, a 19-seat commuter turboprop pushed back from the terminal. SkyWest Flight 5569, flying for Delta Connection. Destination, Palmdale. A short hop north over the mountains. 10 passengers, 2 pilots. Friday night. People going home. The tower told them to taxi onto runway 24 left and hold. So they did. But here's the detail that matters. They didn't stop at the beginning of the runway. They rolled on and stopped at an intersection well down the pavement, sitting in the middle of it, facing away, engines turning. And they waited, exactly like they'd been told. Meanwhile, coming in from the east, USAir Flight 1493, a Boeing 737 that had started its day in Syracuse, New York, worked its way through Washington, then Columbus, Ohio, and was now on final approach to Los Angeles with 83 passengers and 6 crew aboard. Left seat, Captain Colin Shaw, 48 years old. Right seat, First Officer David Kelly, 32. Now up to the tower. This is where it comes apart. One controller was working the local position, and in the space of roughly 2 minutes, small problems started stacking on her desk like dishes. A flight strip she couldn't find, an airplane whose position she couldn't confirm, a radio call that didn't fit anything. So she looked down, started sorting paper, started chasing one loose end, and in that gap, that tiny, ordinary human gap, the little Metroliner sitting out on 24 left slid straight out of her head. She cleared USAir 1493 to land on runway 24 left. Now count the ways this should have been stopped. The supervisor? Didn't catch it. There was no rule anywhere requiring a second pair of eyes on that. Ground radar? Los Angeles didn't have anything that could tell a controller a runway was occupied. Not a light, not a beep, nothing. The 737 crew? They were staring at a dark little airplane parked in front of several thousand city lights, with faint, rear-facing lighting. You would not have seen it either. And the SkyWest pilots? They'd been told to hold in position. They were facing the wrong way. They could not see what was coming down the glide path behind them. 4 chances, 0 saves. 7 minutes past 6. The nose wheel of the Boeing touched the runway and hit the Metroliner. The commuter plane was crushed almost instantly. All 12 people aboard were killed. Their airplane got dragged down the runway underneath the 737, torn open, burning. The Boeing, with the wreckage jammed beneath it, swung left, skidded off into the dirt, and hit an empty fire station building at the edge of the airfield. Right side of the fuselage ripped open, fuel caught. And here's where it stops being a collision and becomes something worse. Because most of the people on that Boeing lived through the impact. Belted in, conscious, alive. What killed them was the next 90 seconds. The nose had crumpled against that building, and the forward exits wouldn't open. Smoke came up thick and black and poisonous almost immediately. Dark cabin, screaming. People unbuckling and moving toward doors that would not move. One overwing exit turned into the only way out. 67 people got through it. 22 didn't. Most of them died of smoke, some of them a few feet from open air. Feet. First Officer Kelly went out through his cockpit window. Captain Shaw didn't survive. Investigators found him back in the passenger cabin. Later, one more survivor died of injuries. 35 in total. The National Transportation Safety Board published its findings that October, and it did something a lot of people did not expect. It refused to just hang it on the controller. The board said the failure belonged to the system that sat her in that chair with no backup, no redundancy, no requirement that anyone confirm a runway was clear, no ground radar, nothing at all standing between one overloaded human being and 35 deaths. That's the verdict. And that's why this one changed things. The Federal Aviation Administration pushed ground surveillance radar into major airports, then added automated systems that scream at the tower when two aircraft are closing on the same runway. Then came runway status lights, red lights set into the pavement that tell a pilot flatly, don't. Controller procedures got rewritten with cross-checks, position relief briefings, memory aids, so an airplane sitting on a runway can't quietly evaporate from someone's mind. Crews were told to light themselves up like a Christmas tree whenever they hold on an active runway at night. Airports were pushed to split takeoffs and landings onto separate runways wherever they could. Obstacles like that abandoned fire station got looked at again and cleared. And because smoke did most of the killing, this accident drove years of work on surviving the cabin itself. Floor-level escape lighting, better exit markings, harder evacuation standards, tighter rules on how fast a full airplane has to be emptied. Runway incursions became a formally tracked national safety category in this country because of nights like this one. So the next time you're sitting on a runway and every light on the airplane snaps on, the next time you hear a controller read a runway number back to a landing crew, slowly, deliberately, like it matters. That's not procedure. That's a receipt. Somebody paid for it on February 1st, 1991 at Los Angeles. 35 people who never got to see each other coming. Saturday, October 19th, 1991. A small grass fire on a hillside above Oakland, California, near Buckingham Boulevard. 5 acres. Nothing. Crews from Oakland, the East Bay Regional Parks, and the state rolled out, hit it, killed it. By evening, the ground was black and quiet. They wrote it up. They went home. 25 people would be dead within 24 hours. Because the fire wasn't out. Not really. Underneath the duff, that thick mat of dead leaves and pine needles sitting on the forest floor, embers were still alive, buried, insulated, breathing. They sat there all night in the dark while the neighborhood above them slept. Sunday morning, crews came back to check hotspots and pick up gear. 2 hours on that hillside, doing everything by the book. And the whole time they worked, the weather was quietly loading a gun behind them. Look at what stacked up that morning. 5th year of a drought. Temperature climbing toward 90 degrees. Humidity falling toward 16%. And then the Diablo winds arrived. Hot, bone-dry air pouring down out of the northeast, gusting to 65 miles an hour. Every condition on the list. All of them. Red. Just before 11 in the morning, the fire came back. And what happened next isn't a fire the way you picture a fire. 30 minutes. That's all it took to reach apartment buildings near the Caldecott Tunnel. It crossed State Route 24, an 8-lane freeway, like the pavement was a suggestion. It ran in 4 directions at once. It burned so hot and so hard that it started making its own wind on a day that was already violent with wind. That's the actual definition of a firestorm, a fire that generates its own weather. In the first hour alone, roughly 790 buildings were gone. Now, why here? Why did this neighborhood specifically come apart like paper? Those hills above Oakland and Berkeley were gorgeous. They were also a loaded trap. Eucalyptus and Monterey pine packed in tight, full of oil. Homes built right into the trees, and on top of an enormous number of those homes, wood shake shingles. So the sky fills with flying embers, and every one of them lands on a roof that is, functionally, kindling nailed to a house. Whole streets caught fire from the top down. Then there were the roads, and this is the part that still turns my stomach. Narrow, winding, steep. Some were dead ends. Most were barely wide enough for 2 cars, and now they had cars parked down both sides. Residents driving down met fire engines driving up. Nobody could pass. People bailed out, left their vehicles sitting in the middle of the road, and ran on foot. Every car they abandoned sealed the road for everyone behind them. And then, the water quit. Power failed, which killed the pumps pushing water up the hill. Reservoirs and tanks drained. Mains and service lines ruptured as houses burned. Firefighters standing on those slopes cracked open hydrants and got nothing. It gets worse. Help arrived and couldn't help. Mutual aid engines poured in from every surrounding agency. Then they found out they physically could not connect. Oakland's hydrants and hose used 3-inch couplings. A lot of the arriving units carried 2.5-inch. Wrong threads, wrong fittings. So you had firefighters standing next to a working hydrant in a burning neighborhood holding hose they could not attach to anything. The radios were no better. Different agencies, different frequencies, and the shared channels jammed solid under the traffic. So the water's gone, the roads are blocked, the radios are useless, and the fire is moving faster than a person can run. That's the situation. And in the middle of it, people did what people do. Oakland Fire Battalion Chief James Riley and Oakland Police Officer John Grubensky stayed in that neighborhood to get residents out. Both men understood exactly how bad their position was. Both had chances to leave. Neither one went. They were found afterward with the remains of the people they were trying to save. Here's the final count. 25 dead, 150 injured, around 10,000 driven out of their homes, 2,843 single-family houses destroyed, plus 437 apartment and condominium units, 1,520 acres, about 2 square miles, $1.5 billion, which made it the most expensive urban wildfire in American history. The fire had drawn its final boundaries by late afternoon. Most of that happened inside one day. Full control didn't come until October 23rd. Then came the reckoning. And this is the reason we're still talking about it. Wood-shake roofs went first. Oakland banned them outright, and California pushed toward requiring fire-resistant Class A roofing across high-hazard areas. In 1992, the state passed what people call the Bates Bill, forcing local governments to actually map out very high fire hazard severity zones and enforce real building and clearance rules inside them. Vegetation management stopped being a polite suggestion. Annual inspections, defensible space requirements, brush clearance programs, eventually paid for by the property owners in those hills themselves. The equipment failure got fixed the hard way. Hydrant and hose fittings were standardized, and adapters became required gear on the engine. Never again does a crew show up to a burning neighborhood and find out they can't reach the water. In the command breakdown, produced the biggest change of all. California passed a law requiring every emergency agency in the state to run on one standardized management system. So when a dozen departments converge on the same disaster, there's one structure, one language, one chain of command. That model went on to shape how this entire country handles major incidents. Common mutual aid radio frequencies came along with it. The phrase wildland-urban interface stopped being research jargon after that Sunday. It became the thing American fire departments plan their whole existence around. 25 people died in about 6 hours. Not in wilderness, not miles from anywhere. On quiet residential streets, half a mile from a freeway, in one of the most developed corners of the United States. That's what changed the rules. A neighborhood. And the fire that did it had already been put out. "81 people clocked in that morning. 56 walked out. The other 25 died trying to open doors that had been padlocked shut, on purpose, by their employer, to stop them from stealing chicken. That's not a metaphor. That's the finding. Tuesday, September 3rd, 1991, the day after Labor Day, Hamlet, North Carolina, a small railroad town down near the South Carolina line. The Imperial Food Products chicken processing plant. They made chicken tenders and nuggets. The work was cold, wet, fast, and hard, in an old building that had lived several other lives before somebody decided it should be a food plant. Imperial had been running it for 11 years. Remember that number. 11 years. It's going to come back. 8:15 in the morning, a hydraulic line let go near a big deep-fat fryer. The line had been repaired before, patched, improvised, held together, and it finally failed. Hydraulic fluid came out under pressure and went straight into the gas burners underneath the cooker. It caught instantly. The fluid lit. The cooking oil lit. And within seconds, the building filled with something far more dangerous than flame. Burning oil and hydraulic fluid throw off enormous volumes of thick, black, poisonous smoke. One survivor said she turned around and saw a black ball of it coming right at her. Everything up to this point is an industrial accident. Bad luck, bad maintenance, bad morning. Here's where it becomes something else. The workers ran for the exits, and the exits were locked. Not every one. Enough. Padlocks and blocked doors, put there deliberately. A state investigation found the plant's owner, Emmett Rowe, personally supervised installing those padlocks. Management's reason? They thought employees were stealing chicken. So picture what that actually looked like inside. People running through smoke they can't see through, that's already killing them, toward a door they've walked past every shift for years. And it won't open. They beat on it, they pry at it. Behind one of those doors, investigators later found bodies stacked where a group of workers went down together. Others turned and ran the opposite way, into the walk-in cooler. Cold air, sealed room, it makes sense when you're panicking. 12 bodies were found in there. 25 dead, 54 injured. 18 of the dead were women, 7 were men. And one of them didn't even work there. He was a vending machine deliveryman who happened to be inside that morning. Then investigators went through the wreckage, and what came out was worse than the fire. No sprinkler system that saved anybody. No working fire alarm. No fire drills. Not one in 11 years. Employees had never been trained on how to get out of the building they worked in every day. And then the finding that put this on every front page in America. No state workplace safety inspector had ever set foot in that plant. Ever. 11 years of operation, 0 visits. Now, that wasn't some overworked agency losing a file. Rowe had never registered the plant with North Carolina's Labor Department, which state law required him to do. Don't register, don't exist. Don't exist, nobody comes. Meanwhile, the state's inspection force was a fraction of what the federal government said it needed to actually cover North Carolina's workplaces. And there's a history here that makes it uglier. Before North Carolina, Rowe ran an operation in Pennsylvania, where federal inspectors hit him with violations. So he moved south. He went looking for leniency. He found it. One more thing, and I want you to sit with it. 80 years earlier, in 1911, 146 garment workers burned to death in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City, many of them trapped behind doors locked to prevent theft. 80 years, same country, same reason, same doors. The reckoning, at least, came harder than Imperial expected. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration cited the company for 83 violations and hit it with $808,150 in penalties. A record for the state. Imperial went bankrupt. The plant never reopened, so Hamlet lost the jobs on top of losing the people. Emmett Rowe was indicted on 25 counts of involuntary manslaughter. He pleaded guilty to all of them. Sentence? 19 years and 11 months. He was paroled in 1997 after about 4 years. Do that math. A little under 2 months in prison per person killed. Congress held hearings 9 days after the fire, and North Carolina, with the entire country watching, finally moved. The General Assembly passed 14 new worker safety laws, including whistleblower protections, so an employee who reports a hazard can't just be fired for reporting it. The state poured money and staff into workplace inspections. Federal officials made it plain that North Carolina's authority to run its own safety program was on the table if it didn't clean house. Even the politics turned. In the 1992 election, the state's labor commissioner got knocked out in his own party's primary by a challenger running on labor reform. And nationally, locked and blocked exits became the thing inspectors hunt for first. Exit routes stopped being a paperwork item and became the headline item. Because Hamlet proved something in the plainest language possible. Every other safety system in a building is worth exactly nothing if a human being cannot physically get out of it. 25 people died on a Tuesday morning making chicken nuggets in a building where the doors had been chained shut to protect the inventory. That's it. That's the whole story. "25 people died on a Sunday morning in Colorado, and for the next 10 years, the United States government told their families the same thing. We don't know why. Not "we're still working on it," not "the investigation continues." Officially, on the record, closed, cause unknown. That has happened a handful of times in the entire history of American aviation. March 3, 1991, a short hop, Denver to Colorado Springs, about 20 minutes in the air. The kind of flight where nobody bothers taking their coat off. United Airlines Flight 585. A Boeing 737, 20 passengers, 5 crew. Left seat, Captain Harold Green, 52. Right seat, First Officer Patricia Eidson, 42. One of a very small number of women flying the line for a major airline in 1991. It was windy that morning, really windy. The Rockies sit right on the western edge of Colorado Springs, and when air pours over mountains like that, it tumbles and rolls on the far side. Pilots were reporting rough rides all morning. Hold on to that. The wind is going to matter, just not the way you'd think. 9:45. Final approach, runway 35. Gear down, flaps set. Under 1,000 feet, about 4 miles from the pavement. Lined up, stable, boring. Then the airplane rolled right, and it didn't stop. Past a normal bank, past a steep bank, past 90 degrees, nose dropping. The whole thing, start to finish, took less than 10 seconds. There was no altitude to trade, no time to diagnose anything, nothing to try. The 737 hit the ground nearly straight down in a public park in Widefield, just south of the city, at something like 245 miles an hour. Everyone aboard died instantly. Sunday morning, empty park. Nobody on the ground was hurt. And then this crash became something no other crash was. Investigators opened it up and could not figure out what happened. They had the cockpit voice recorder. They had the flight data recorder. And that recorder, on a jetliner in 1991, recorded 5 things. 5. Heading, altitude, airspeed, G-loads, and whether somebody had keyed a microphone. Nothing about the rudder. Nothing about where the pilot's controls were. Investigators were handed a story with the most important pages torn out of it. 2 theories on the table. 1. Weather. A rotor, a violent horizontal spinning column of air that forms downwind of mountains. 2. Mechanical. A failure in the rudder power control unit, the thing that actually moves the rudder. If that unit went wrong a certain way, the rudder could slam to full deflection on its own, or go the opposite direction from what the pilot asked for. They couldn't prove either one. So, on December 8, 1992, the National Transportation Safety Board did something it almost never does. It closed the investigation with no probable cause. The official wording: after an exhaustive effort, the board could not identify conclusive evidence explaining the loss of United Flight 585. Now sit with what that means if you're one of those families. Your husband is dead. Your daughter is dead. And the federal government tells you, in writing, that it doesn't know why. The airplane type keeps flying. Nothing gets fixed. And the wind quietly takes most of the blame. 3.5 years go by. September 8, 1994. USAir Flight 427, a Boeing 737, rolls over on approach to Pittsburgh, and dives into the ground. 132 people dead. Same airplane type, same sudden roll, same low altitude, same nothing you can do. 1 is a mystery, 2 is a pattern. Colorado Springs got pulled back open, but the thing that actually cracked it came 2 years after that. June 9, 1996, an Eastwind Airlines 737 on approach to Richmond, Virginia. The rudder goes hard over on its own. Exactly the thing nobody could prove, except this crew had more altitude and more speed. They fought the airplane, won, and landed it. For the first time, investigators had pilots who had been through it and lived to describe it. Testing did the rest. Inside the rudder's power control unit sat a servo valve with sliding parts machined to brutally tight tolerances. Up at cruise, that valve soaks in deep cold for hours. Then, hot hydraulic fluid hits it. Under the right conditions, the slides jam, and jammed a particular way, the rudder swings to full travel in the direction opposite the one being commanded. Push the pedal right, the airplane goes hard left. At 1,000 feet, gear down, slow, on approach, you don't survive that. Nobody survives that. March 27, 2001. The Safety Board adopts a revised report and finally names a cause: loss of control from uncommanded movement of the rudder to full deflection. 10 years and 24 days after the crash, here's what those families bought with that decade. The Federal Aviation Administration ordered inspections and tests of rudder units across the fleet. Boeing redesigned the rudder control system with genuine redundancy so a single jam can never again take an airplane away from its crew, and paid to retrofit every 737 on the planet. Training changed. Crews learned crossover airspeed, the speed above which the wing's controls can outmuscle a fully deflected rudder, and got drilled on adding power and dropping the nose the instant an airplane starts rolling against them. And the recorders finally got fixed. After Colorado Springs, a 5-parameter black box was indefensible. Regulators forced through recorders capturing dozens of parameters, including the positions of the flight controls themselves, with older aircraft retrofitted over the years that followed. 25 died in Colorado in 1991. 132 died in Pennsylvania in 1994. The first group's families got their answer only because the second group existed. A pickup truck came through the front window of a crowded cafeteria at lunchtime, and the people inside got up to help the driver. That's what they did. Somebody had a heart attack. Somebody hit the gas instead of the brake. That's what 150 Texans assumed, and they moved toward the wreck to pull whoever it was out. Wednesday, October 16, 1991. Killeen, Texas. A working town pressed right up against Fort Hood, one of the biggest military installations on Earth. It was Boss's Day. All over the country, people were taking their supervisors out to lunch, and the Luby's cafeteria out on the highway was packed. Trays, iced tea, the lunch rush. 20 minutes to 1. The truck comes through the glass. The driver was 35-year-old George Hennard. He got out with 2 handguns and started shooting. It lasted about 12 minutes. Investigators later concluded he was hunting women specifically. Of the 23 people he killed, 14 were women, 9 were men. He moved through that dining room deliberately, at close range, while people crouched under tables and behind the salad bar. Some played dead, some crawled, some just froze. And I want to be careful here, because it's easy to judge that from a chair. Nothing in an ordinary American life in 1991 prepared a single person in that room for what was happening. Then, a 32-year-old customer named Tommy Vaughn did something extraordinary. He threw his own body through a plate glass window at the back of the building, went straight through it, and that hole let dozens of trapped people get out alive. There was another 32-year-old in that room, a chiropractor named Susanna Gracia, having lunch with her father Al and her mother Ursula. She watched him work the room. She reached for her purse and remembered her handgun was sitting out in her car because carrying it in Texas was against the law and she'd stopped bringing it inside. Her father decided to charge him. He was shot. Susanna got out through the window Tommy Vaughn had opened. Her mother didn't follow. She had gone to her husband. She stayed with him. She was killed there, beside him. Killeen officers pushed inside and exchanged fire. Hennard retreated to an alcove by the restrooms and killed himself. 23 dead, 27 wounded. Army helicopters came in from Fort Hood to move casualties because the local hospitals could not absorb that many at once. At that moment, it was the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. It passed the McDonald's massacre in San Ysidro, California from 7 years before. It held that record until Virginia Tech in 2007. No motive was ever fully established. Hennard had been dismissed from the Merchant Marine. Neighbors described him the way neighbors always describe these men afterward. He had documented hostility toward women, including threatening letters, and he bought his guns legally. That's where this stops being one terrible afternoon and turns into an argument this country is still having right now. Because Killeen produced reform in two opposite directions at the same time. Both of them are real. Stay with me on this one, because most people only ever hear half of it. Susanna Gracia, later Susanna Gracia Hupp, went to Austin and to Washington and said the same thing over and over. She sat 15 feet from the man who murdered both her parents with her own weapon locked in a car because the state told her to leave it there. She testified. She campaigned. In 1993, the Texas legislature passed a concealed carry bill, and the governor vetoed it. In 1995, they passed it again, and Governor George W. Bush signed it, letting qualified Texans get a license to carry a concealed handgun. She was elected to the Texas House in 1996 and served 10 years. Texas became one of the most permissive gun states in the country, and this shooting is the reason that door opened. Meanwhile, in Washington, Killeen was being used to argue the exact opposite. The arithmetic of it, 1 man, 2 pistols, a crowded room, 12 minutes, became a central exhibit for federal limits. The 1994 crime bill included a 10-year restriction on certain semi-automatic weapons and a cap of 10 rounds per magazine. Killeen was part of the record that got it passed. That ban expired in 2004 and was never renewed. Away from the politics, quieter things changed. Mass casualty response across Central Texas got rebuilt around that day. How many ambulances? How fast? How you triage dozens of gunshot wounds at once? When you call the Army. And there's a harder lesson that took years longer to land. In 1991, hiding under a table was the only thing anybody in that building knew to do. Teaching civilians to run, to barricade, to fight back, the training now standard in every American school and office did not exist yet. Killeen was one of the events that forced it into existence. The Luby's reopened in March of 1992. It closed for good in 2000. The building's still there, different restaurant now, and down the street there's a slab of pink granite with 23 names cut into it, and a date. Remember what those people did first, before any of it started. A truck came through the window, and they got up to go help the driver. That's who they were. "23 people died because somebody swapped one metal tube for a slightly harder metal tube. That's it. That's the accident. A component got quietly improved. Nobody checked what would happen when the improved version rubbed against the part next to it, and 4 months later, a brand new airliner fell out of the sky over Georgia. Friday afternoon, April 5th, 1991. A commuter run out of Atlanta. Atlantic Southeast Airlines Flight 2311, flying as a Delta connection, headed down to Glencoe Jetport in Brunswick, Georgia. Short hop toward the coast. 20 passengers, 2 pilots, 1 flight attendant. They were already 23 minutes late. The airplane originally scheduled for the trip had a mechanical problem, so they swapped aircraft and pushed back at 1:45. The replacement was an Embraer EMB 120 Brasilia, twin turboprop, built November 30th, 1990, 4 months old, basically out of the box. The flight down was uneventful. No distress call, nothing. 2:45. Cleared for a visual approach to runway 07. Crew acknowledges. Makes a routine call on the company radio. People on the ground watch them come around. Wide turn onto final, about 20 degrees of bank, easing down. Textbook. Then the nose came up a little, and the airplane rolled left. It didn't stop at a steep bank. It kept going until the wings were straight up and down, vertical, and then the nose dropped. Witnesses heard a squeal, a high, rising whine, right before impact. It hit 2 miles short of the runway. All 23 aboard were killed. Among them, former United States Senator John Tower of Texas, 65, traveling with his daughter Marion. Tower chaired the commission that investigated Iran-Contra. He'd been nominated Secretary of Defense 2 years earlier and rejected by the same Senate he'd served in for 24 years. He was on a book tour. Also on board, Manly Sonny Carter Jr., physician, former professional soccer player, NASA astronaut, flew on the space shuttle in 1989 in line for another mission, a genuine national asset, and he died in a field in Georgia on a Friday afternoon. And Dr. Nicholas Davies, the incoming president of the American College of Physicians. Now here's what investigators walked into. No flight data recorder, no cockpit voice recorder. Not missing, not destroyed, never installed, because commuter aircraft that size weren't required to carry them in 1991. So there's no readout, no voices, no data. Just wreckage in a field and the memories of whoever happened to be looking up. They solved it anyway, out of metal. The left propeller told them everything. Examine the components and you can read the blade angle at the moment of impact. It was about 3 degrees, nearly flat. In flight, a propeller blade sits at a much steeper angle, screwing its way through the air. Flatten it to 3 degrees and it stops being a propeller. It becomes a disc, a wall. Enormous drag, on one side of the airplane only. That squeal the witnesses heard? That was the propeller running away. Then they found why, and it's almost insultingly small. Inside the propeller control unit sits a tube that fits into a mating part with interlocking splines, teeth that grip each other. Somewhere along the line, the manufacturer changed the tube's coating to a harder, rougher material. Harder tube, softer mating part. Guess what happens over time? The hard one chewed up the soft one. And when those teeth let go, the system lost its grip on where the blades were supposed to sit. The safety board's finding, published April 1992, was blunt. Loss of control from a malfunction of the left engine propeller control unit, which allowed the blade angles to go below flight idle. Contributing, deficient design of that unit by the manufacturer, Hamilton Standard, and approval of that design by the Federal Aviation Administration. Read that again. The failure that killed 23 people was never properly evaluated by the people who built it, or by the people who signed off on it. And it wasn't a freak either. Between 1988 and 1992, the EMB-120 had 8 propeller overspeed events on approach. 6 of those aircraft had no beta lockout device, the protection built to stop exactly this. 2 of the 8 were not recoverable. The fixes came fast, at least. The propeller control unit got redesigned, and the lockout that keeps a blade from going below flight idle in the air became standard equipment instead of an option. Certification practice changed too, actually chasing down single points of failure in propeller control systems, instead of waving through a design change because it looks minor. And on October 11, 1991, 6 months after the crash, flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders became required on this aircraft type. No more investigating a fatal accident with eyewitnesses and scrap metal. The board flagged one more thing. This crew had a maximum of 8 hours and 15 minutes off duty between duty days, maybe 5 or 6 hours of actual sleep. Investigators specifically ruled fatigue out as a factor here, and raised it anyway, because roughly 60% of that airline's layovers ran reduced rest, and the entire commuter industry operated that way. Which points at the bigger thread. Flight 2311 flew under the lighter set of federal rules covering commuter carriers, not the strict ones covering the majors. A string of commuter crashes in the early 90s, this one included, drove the push that landed in 1995 when the FAA required airlines flying aircraft with 10 or more seats to meet the same standard as the big carriers. One level of safety, same rules whether your airplane holds 30 people or 300. 23 people boarded a 4-month-old airplane in Atlanta. It came apart in the sky because somebody made one part harder, and nobody asked what it would do to the part beside it. Friday, April 26, 1991, the Great Plains. Forecasters had been shouting about this for a full day. Every ingredient the atmosphere needed was sitting there, loaded, and by mid-afternoon, the sky started cashing it in. By the time the day was over, 54 tornadoes had crossed 6 Midwestern states. 24 dead, more than 200 injured. 30 of those tornadoes rated F2 or stronger, and at one point that evening, 3 separate F4 or F5 tornadoes were on the ground simultaneously, in 3 different places. One of them, near Red Rock, Oklahoma, went straight into the record books. A research team with a portable Doppler radar got close enough to measure it directly and clocked winds around 280 miles an hour, among the highest wind speeds ever recorded on this planet. Measured, not estimated. But that's not the one people still talk about. 10 minutes to 6, southwest of Wichita, a tornado touches down near Clearwater and starts walking northeast. It stayed on the ground for an hour and 25 minutes, 46 miles. At its worst, it was over 400 yards wide, winds above 260 miles an hour. F5, top of the scale, nothing above it. And here's the problem. It walked through populated ground the entire way. Hayesville took damage first. Then it crossed McConnell Air Force Base, wrecking 9 major facilities and doing $62 million in damage. It missed a flight line of B-1 bombers by about 1,000 feet. Then Greenwich Heights, on the southeast edge of Wichita. 4 people killed there, 2 adults and 2 children caught in the open while they were trying to reach shelter. An elementary school torn up. And then it turned toward Andover. 4,300 people, Butler County. Now, the warning system actually worked. A tornado warning naming Andover specifically went out roughly 13 minutes ahead of it. 13 minutes is enough. 13 minutes should have been plenty. Except Andover's only outdoor warning siren didn't go off. So a police officer did the only thing left. He drove his cruiser into the Golden Spur Mobile Home Park with his siren running and went up and down the rows trying to get people out of their trailers and into the ground. There's dash camera video of him doing it. 244 homes in that park. 1 community storm shelter. 149 people made it inside. Every single one of them lived. 38 didn't make it in. 13 of them died. The tornado hit the park dead center. 205 of those 244 homes were destroyed. 84%. Not damaged, gone. Damage surveyors who do this for a living said it was among the worst they had ever seen. 165 injured in that park alone. It kept going, tore through the rest of Andover, hit an oil field and through a large storage tank most of a mile, clipped the outskirts of Towanda, and finally died west of El Dorado. 17 people killed by that one tornado, the deadliest in America that year. More than 1,700 homes damaged or destroyed across south-central Kansas. 2 days later, the governor asked for a federal disaster declaration, and got it. So what changed? Start with radar. Wichita, in 1991, was running an old system that could show you where the rain was, but not what the wind inside a storm was actually doing. Meanwhile, a brand new Doppler radar down in Norman, Oklahoma, watched that exact same storm and picked up the rotation 24 minutes before the tornado touched the ground. 24 minutes. From a machine sitting states away, while the city in the crosshairs was flying blind. That comparison became one of the arguments that drove the whole National Weather Service modernization through the 90s. The nationwide Doppler rollout, roughly 160 radars, until essentially every populated corner of the country was covered. Tornado warning lead times roughly doubled over that decade. The sirens got fixed too, and not just in Andover. Towns across the plains audited their warning networks, built in redundancy and regular testing, and stopped pretending one siren on one pole counts as a warning system. NOAA weather radio expanded, with alert technology that lets a receiver in your bedroom wake you up for your county specifically. But the biggest thing Andover changed is how this country thinks about shelters. Public health researchers went into that mobile home park and studied exactly who lived and who died. The answer wasn't complicated. The shelter worked. That study became foundational evidence in the push for community storm shelters in manufactured housing parks, and it fed straight into the federal safe room standards and grant programs that came later. The engineering that tells you how to build a room capable of surviving 250-mile-an-hour winds. Andover rebuilt. 31 years later, almost to the day, another tornado came through the same town. That time, nobody died. 13 people died in Andover in 1991 because they were above ground when the sirens stayed silent. 149 are alive because somebody, years before any of them moved in, dug a hole and put a door on it. "4 days. That's the whole gap." On October 27, 1991, the Minnesota Twins won Game 7 of the World Series inside the Metrodome. The state was still celebrating. It was mild out. People were in jackets, not parkas. 4 days later, the upper Midwest was buried under the biggest snowstorm in its recorded history. Thursday, October 31st, Halloween. Kids across Minnesota and Wisconsin had costumes laid out. Parents had the routes planned. And all day, forecasters were tracking a system coming up from the south, dragging Gulf of Mexico moisture straight north into cold air sliding down out of Canada. Early forecasts called for a few inches, something to grumble about, nothing that changes your evening. Now, why did that call go so wrong? Look east. There was a monster storm parked off the Atlantic coast, the one that got the nickname the perfect storm. That system jammed the entire weather pattern across the eastern half of the country, and with nowhere to go, the storm over the Midwest slowed down and stalled out. A storm that should have passed through, instead sat down, and kept unloading. The snow started Halloween afternoon. There are people in Minnesota who still describe trick-or-treating that night. Kids in thin costumes, in the dark, in snow that went from a dusting to ankle-deep to knee-deep while they were still out on the sidewalk. Parents hauling them home early. Plenty of families never got out the door at all. When it finally stopped on November 4th, the numbers were ridiculous for the calendar. Minneapolis and St. Paul, 28.4 inches. That's not a seasonal total. That's one storm. It's still the largest single snowstorm in Twin Cities history, and it happened in October. Duluth, 36.9 inches. Also a record. Also its biggest storm ever. And it wasn't all snow. Across southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, that same system came down as freezing rain, and honestly, that might be where the worst of it landed. Ice loaded onto every wire, every branch, every pole. Trees came apart under their own weight. Power lines snapped by the mile. Around 100,000 customers lost electricity, and some of them stayed dark for days, longer in places. Then came the part nobody saw coming. Arctic air poured south behind the storm. Temperatures crashed to record lows for the date, on top of snowpack already 2 feet deep, which means the snow that fell on Halloween didn't melt, not in November, not in December. In the Twin Cities, there was snow on the ground continuously from that Halloween night until spring. Between the blizzard and the ice storm, 22 people were killed, more than 100 injured. And here's what I want you to sit with, because winter storms get remembered wrong. Nobody died dramatically. They died the way people always die in weather like this, ordinarily and mostly alone. Heart attacks while shoveling snow heavier and deeper than anything they'd ever moved. Cars off roads that had simply vanished into whiteout. Exposure. People who stepped out to check on something and got turned around 50 feet from their own front door. On the scale used to grade winter storms in this country, it was rated in the highest category, extreme, the top. So what came out of it? The big one was forecasting, and not just for this storm. The National Weather Service modernization ran all through the 90s. Doppler radar rolled out nationwide. Automated observing stations went in, feeding continuous data from places that used to report by hand a few times a day. And computer models got dramatically better at the exact thing they blew in 1991. How much snow, in which band, for how long. A storm like that today gets flagged days ahead, with totals in the right neighborhood. That's the difference. How warnings reach you changed too. NOAA weather radio expanded across the region, with technology that lets a receiver in your house alarm for your county specifically, so a warning doesn't depend on you happening to have the TV on. On the ground, the Twin Cities rebuilt how snow emergencies work. The ordinances, the parking rules, the plowing sequence, and above all the public messaging, so residents actually know which side of the street to move the car to and when. Minnesota's road agencies overhauled winter operations and the rules for closing highways before people are stranded on them, instead of after. The utilities drew a different lesson from the ice. Aggressive tree trimming around lines, hardened poles, mutual aid agreements that let crews from unaffected regions get pre-staged ahead of a storm, rather than summoned after it. And there's one more change that Minnesotans now take completely for granted: the winter survival kit in the trunk. Blankets, candles, food, a shovel, real boots in the car, even when you're only driving 15 minutes. That drumbeat became relentless in the upper Midwest after 1991, because a lot of the people who got in trouble that week were driving short, familiar routes dressed for a normal day. 35 years on, you do not have to explain the Halloween blizzard to anyone in Minnesota. You say it, and every person in the room has a story. 4 days after a World Series, in October, with the kids still out in costumes. Cape Cod is connected to the rest of America by 2 bridges. 2. Remember that, because on August 19, 1991, a few 100,000 summer vacationers all tried to use them at the same time, and the line at one of those bridges stretched 11 miles. Peak summer on the New England coast: Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Block Island, Newport. Rentals full, beaches full, marinas packed with boats. A stretch of coastline that hadn't taken a direct hurricane hit in a very long time. Hurricane Bob formed in the central Bahamas on August 16th, hit hurricane strength on the 17th, and then did the thing that makes East Coast storms genuinely dangerous. It accelerated north-northeast, running parallel to the shore, moving fast. The eye crossed Block Island, Rhode Island, at about 1:30 in the afternoon. Landfall at Newport shortly before 2. Category 2. Now, before we go further, there's a piece sitting underneath this whole story, and without it, none of the human behavior makes sense. 6 years earlier, in 1985, Hurricane Gloria came at this same region with enormous buildup, evacuations, boarded windows, wall-to-wall coverage, and then it showed up weakened and mostly fizzled. The word people used afterward was overhyped. So when Bob was coming, plenty of New Englanders had already made up their minds about what a hurricane warning was worth. They'd seen this movie. Some of them stayed. The ones who did leave gave us that 11-mile line at the Sagamore Bridge. On Chappaquiddick, residents were ordered off the island to Martha's Vineyard, where people were sheltering in churches and schools. Rhode Island declared a state of emergency, closed the banks, shut the non-essential state offices. And then Bob arrived. And Bob was not Gloria. Sustained winds along the immediate coast ran 75 to 100 miles an hour. Peak gusts of 125 recorded on Cape Cod at Brewster and North Truro. And, weirdly, well inland at Wethersfield, Connecticut. North Truro logged a sustained 100. Block Island measured 90 sustained with gusts past 105, which is simply where the equipment quit. A Navy ship riding it out in Narragansett Bay clocked gusts near 100. 4 tornadoes reported as it came ashore. But the water was worse than the wind, and here's why. Along the open Rhode Island shore, the surge ran 5 to 8 feet. Survivable. Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts, though, is shaped like a funnel, and a funnel takes a surge and squeezes it. Water piled up past 10 feet at the head of that bay. Waterfront homes came off their foundations. Thousands of boats destroyed, sunk at their moorings, stacked on top of each other, thrown into marsh grass and parking lots. Then the lights went out across New England. More than 60% of residents in southeast Rhode Island and southeast Massachusetts lost power. Region-wide, roughly 2.1 million homes went dark. Trees came down by the thousands, and every tree across a road blocked the crews trying to reach the next one. In Warwick, Rhode Island, work crews bolted snowplows onto trucks just to shove the debris aside. For a lot of people, this became the actual disaster, and it lasted. No power means no water if you're on a well pump. Rhode Island's utilities got nearly 99% of about 1 million customers back by August 26th. Call it a week. Remote parts of the Cape and the Vineyard took longer. The National Guard came in for cleanup and to truck in drinking water. 18 people died, including 2 in Nova Scotia after the storm crossed into Canada. Most of those were the quiet kind of death. Heart attacks, accidents, the aftermath rather than the impact itself. Damage came to about $1.5 billion. That put Bob among the costliest hurricanes in New England history, and one of the costliest in the country at that point. The name was retired. It'll never be used again. So what changed? Mostly unglamorous things, and most of them trace back to that 11-mile line of cars. Emergency managers in Massachusetts and Rhode Island went back and did the arithmetic on evacuation clearance times. How many hours it actually takes to move a summer population off the Cape and the islands through 2 bridges and a ferry system. The answer was long enough to scare them. That work rewrote when evacuation orders get issued, not when the storm is close, a day or more out. Because the alternative is families sitting in traffic on a bridge in hurricane-force wind. Storm surge modeling got applied seriously to New England's bays for the first time, and those results became formal evacuation zones, the maps that tell you which zone your house sits in and at what category you go. Before Bob, that barely existed up there. Coastal building standards tightened on wind loads and on elevation in surge zones. Utilities rewrote their storm playbooks, aggressive tree trimming, pre-storm mutual aid agreements to stage out-of-state crews before landfall instead of after, and in the most exposed coastal spots, burying the lines entirely rather than rebuilding poles the ocean is just going to knock down again. Here's the fact I want to leave you with. Hurricane Bob, August 19, 1991, is still the most recent hurricane to make landfall in New England. Still. 35 years. Which means there are people living on that coast right now, in houses their families have owned since before Bob, who have never been through one. And the last time that region forgot what a hurricane looks like, it was because the one before had under-delivered. If you're ever caught in a dust storm on the highway, the thing your instincts tell you to do will get you killed. Slow down, stay in your lane, put on your hazard lights. Every one of those is wrong. And 17 people found that out the hard way on the Friday after Thanksgiving, 1991. Interstate 5 is the spine of California, the road connecting the north of the state to the south. And on Thanksgiving Friday, it carries everybody who ate turkey somewhere else and is now driving home. Families, kids in the back seat, coolers full of leftovers. The stretch through the San Joaquin Valley near Coalinga is normally some of the richest farmland in America. Not that year. California was in the 6th year of a severe drought. That part of the valley had seen almost no rain in 9 months. So farmers made a decision that made complete economic sense. Leave the fields fallow. No crop, no water spent. But the ground had still been plowed, which left mile after mile of open, loose, powder-dry dirt sitting right alongside a freeway, with nothing growing in it to hold it down. All it needed was wind. 2:30 in the afternoon, the wind showed up. Gusts near 40 miles an hour peeled that soil off the fields and pushed it across the highway as a solid wall. Visibility didn't fade, it vanished. One survivor said it came and went, and then it just went, all at once. The highway patrol never got the chance to close the road. It came up too fast. What happened next played out over about 1.5 miles of pavement, 45 miles north of Coalinga. Cars up front slowed, stopped, crashed. Cars behind entered the dust cloud at highway speed, with no possible way to know the road ahead was already a wall of wreckage. It broke into roughly 5 separate clusters, one 20-car pileup northbound, most of the rest southbound. Final count, 104 vehicles, 93 cars, and 11 semi-trucks. And then the fires started. Several vehicles ignited, with cars jammed together and people trapped inside them, and the fire did a great deal of the killing. 9 bodies came out of one of the worst burned areas, charred beyond recognition. 2 of them were never identified. 17 dead, 150 injured, ages 1-year-old to 70. The individual stories out of that hour are hard to sit with, so I'll give you 2. One man was impaled by a bumper while he was lifting his son out of the back of a pickup truck. Another family simply ran, left the car, grabbed the kids, and sprinted for the shoulder while they could still hear vehicles arriving behind them. 150 miles of Interstate 5 shut down for a full day. Authorities called it the worst highway pileup in California history, and possibly the worst anywhere in the country up to that point, measured by dead and injured. Now here's the part that should bother you. This wasn't a first warning. The valley had a track record. The Great Bakersfield dust storm of 1977 had already shown exactly what that soil could do. And in 1978, a run of smaller dust storms killed 7 people in crashes on this same section of Interstate 5. 13 years later, same road, same dirt, same result, just bigger. So what actually changed? 3 things, plus one that's free. First, detection. California started building out low-visibility monitoring along the valley's high-risk corridors. Wind and visibility sensors wired to message signs upstream, so drivers get warned before they enter the dust instead of after. The Central Valley is now one of the most heavily instrumented stretches of highway in the country, and this is why. Second, procedure. The Highway Patrol and the State Transportation Department built protocols for closing the road proactively and for escorting traffic through at low speed behind a pilot vehicle when visibility collapses, rather than waiting to find out whether drivers can sort it out themselves. Third, the dirt itself. Blowing farm soil in the San Joaquin Valley eventually stopped being treated as weather and started being treated as a regulated air quality problem. Rules came in for dust control on agricultural land, cover on fallow ground, reduced tillage, windbreaks, controls on unpaved farm roads. Not because of this one crash, but this crash is a big part of why that soil is now legally somebody's responsibility instead of nobody's. And then there's the fourth thing. It costs nothing. Most American drivers still get it wrong. Back to where we started. In 1991, the instinct when the world disappeared was to slow down, hold your lane, and switch on the hazards. That instinct killed people, because the driver coming up behind you at 70, completely blind, sees your lights and steers toward them, because he assumes you're a moving car on a moving road. The right answer is the opposite of all of it. Learn this if you ever drive the Central Valley, or Arizona, or West Texas. Get off the freeway if you possibly can. If you can't, pull completely off the roadway, as far from the travel lanes as you can physically get. Then, turn your lights off. All of them, hazards included. Take your foot off the brake so the brake lights go dark. Seatbelt on. Wait, the entire point is to stop being a target. In a dust storm, a lit-up car near the pavement is a magnet for everybody still moving. That lesson got written on 1.5 miles of Interstate 5 on the Friday after Thanksgiving, with 104 vehicles on it, and 17 people who were only driving home.